Hello, I'm Greg with pRiMaL Rights. Today we're going to talk about an issue that comes up probably 2 to 3 times a day. I'll get a phone call from someone, and before they can even start asking me the question that they called to ask or get into the discussion that they wanted to have, they feel compelled to tell me that they are not a competition shooter. And they do so in a manner that describes themselves as lesser and the competition shooters as greater. And so they automatically want to make sure that I understand that they are a lesser degree of shooter. Now, this is not a pleasant thing for me to experience as an instructor. It is my least favorite thing, potentially, that happens on these types of phone calls, because immediately it triggers all of these red flags in my head and saying, no, actually, everyone is on the same playing field here. Everyone is equal. You have just as much right to the information as someone that's competing. The pursuit of this discipline has nothing to do with whether or not you're competing, because there are many facets of this discipline. Some of those facets are indeed competitive sports. So you've got your square range shooters, such as bench rest and F-class and high power and such. They're called square range because, generally speaking, it's done at an established range. You always go to the same places. The targets generally are at the same distances, and there's a sanctioning of the event that takes place by some sort of governing body. Then you've got short range, 100, 200 yard, 100, 200 meter. You've got long range, 1,000 yard, and now ELR, extended long range. The field discipline, NRL or PRS, IBS, it's like alphabet soup when it comes to trying to describe all of these different disciplines. Competition is competition. The very nature of it dictates that it's going to be either this person or this team against all of these other people or teams. Winning is requisite on someone losing. So competition can bring out the very best in people, and it can also bring out the very worst. Now, a lot of you may not know this, but I no longer compete with a rifle or a handgun or anything else. I have zero interest in any competitive aspects of this discipline at all. I have not competed in any competition in this discipline since I think 2014. Now, I routinely placed first place in every competition that I went to. However, that was then. This is now. I have no doubt that with the pedigree of competitor that's out there these days, it would be a lot harder. I would not necessarily be guaranteed a first place finish regardless of where I went or who I competed against. There's more shooters than ever. The competition is more talented than ever. And it was a different landscape then than it is now. There was some very specific observations that I had of competitions and competitors. Ultimately, it led me to leave the entirety of competition behind with absolutely no desire to re-enter it at any point. Now, before we get into that, let's just acknowledge some of the potentially good things that competition can do. Competition can work out problems with your gear. All of the equipment that you use, whether it be on your rifle, the equipment at your loading bench, or perhaps support equipment such as little kestrel meters or laser rangefinders or observation devices of some kind. Competition can weed out a lot of inferior gear just as a function of exposure. It's forcing you to be at a certain place at a certain date and time, and the environmentals are going to be what they are at that date and time, and so you're going to have to deal with all manner of weather condition and all manner of debris. If it's going to be windy and you're in a dusty place where it's sandy, well, it's going to be very hard on gear. Variances that you'll run into in competition do have the tendency to get your gear game figured out just as a necessity. If you want things to go well and flow well on your stages, you're going to have some good gear that's well worked out. Another positive aspect of competition is that it can let you know where you stand in the group if that sort of thing's important to you. I don't want to downplay this element of competition because there's a lot of people that they define themselves by how they do against others. If they can do well in a group of other talented shooters, well, then they feel very good about themselves. And so that can be a very positive thing. The social aspect is another positive thing that can come as a result of competition. Everybody gets to get together and talk and make friends, and you get to experience all kinds of new areas of the world that you might not otherwise go to if you didn't have a shooting competition to attend there. Technology is another place where competition has a tendency to really propel things forward, because the desire to beat other people can be really powerful, and it's a very common motivator in our society. And so the companies that are producing things that would give a competitor an edge in performance over his fellow man, that kind of stuff can make quite a bit of money for various companies that are selling that type of gear. And so the business around the competitive advantage is pretty huge. So it's in this way that competition can spur creativity of inventors, and they can come up with some pretty excellent technology that's designed to be used in competition. Then there's the raw accuracy and precision element to competition. Some of these types of competition, especially the square range disciplines, they have a very small target that is quite distant or just very, very small, and it requires you to push yourself. You have to really understand what's going on in the discipline in order to excel at it. Let's face it, not everybody can hit a 5-inch target at 1,000 yards. It's just not something that anyone's ever asked them to do before, and they've never asked it of themselves. And so entering into the square range competition such as that can be very beneficial to spur shooters on, to get them to aim a little higher, if you will. But coming back to what started this video in the first place, why do people feel like they are lesser than these competitors? There's a lot of people that compete and they do fairly well, and of course those are accomplished shooters in that discipline. But what about the middle of the pack? Or worse still, what about the bottom of the pack? Why would someone that calls me on the phone feel that they need to downplay the reasoning of why they're calling? Why would they feel like they're less than a competitor, even when, as a former competitor, I know that there's a lot of people that are at these events that will shoot way worse than the guy that's on the phone with me right now telling me that he's not a competitor, believing that he shouldn't be taken as seriously as someone that does compete. This is where we get into the really dangerous and dark aspect of this entire discussion. From an instructor's point of view, there's a very specific thing that happens mentally when someone arbitrarily decides that they are less than someone else, or that their needs are lesser than someone else's needs. It seems pretty obvious now that I've mentioned it. You should be thinking about it, but the mental aspect of feeling inferior is a very real thing. And in my role as an instructor, as a teacher, as a mentor, I run afoul of this personality trait in people quite often, where they are limited by their own thoughts and beliefs more than they're limited by anything that's going on externally, or with their rifle or their ammunition or their loading or any of their other things that they're doing. It's actually what they're thinking about that is limiting them more than any other one thing. And it all starts right here with the belief that just because you're not engaged in some competitive aspect of the discipline, then you're not to be taken seriously. Unfortunately, it is categorically wrong and absolutely untrue, and I can't possibly overstate just how untrue it is. Some of the best shooters that I have ever met in my life have never competed ever once, even a singular little bit. They've never attended a single event, nothing. They are simply a student of this discipline. They pursue it with that childlike fascination and purity. It excites them. They're okay with feeling excited about it. And frankly, I have more in common with those guys than I do most people. The best parts of this discipline have almost nothing to do with how many people you can beat or how badly you can beat them. This negative aspect that comes along with believing that because you're not engaged in competition against some other shooter, that your shooting then should take a back seat, to these other guys is simply false. It's a foolish mindset. There's a purity of the discipline that will be forever off limits to competitors. All of this emphasis put on competitors and what competition wants and what competitive people are looking to do. This doesn't really matter what discipline we're talking about, right? I mean, we could be talking about race car driving, or we could be talking about anything else, fishing competitions, right? The aspect that causes people to want to do better than other people. The reasons are as long as my arm. And of course, the people that love competition, they have all of the reasons in the world. And you know what? That's perfectly okay. It is perfectly okay to love competition. It's perfectly okay to enjoy going to competitive events. What's not okay is that if you're not a competitor, somehow making yourself believe that these competitors are a special protected class of shooter. That's not actually in keeping with reality. Let me share with you some of the negative aspects of competition. If you're going and shooting a competition and you go up to a particular stage or a particular event and the scorekeeper is friends with some of the other shooters, that scorekeeper is giving help and different favoritism being shown to a certain group or a certain selection of shooters that doesn't get shown to anyone else. How about manipulation of score charts and score software? Editing things after the shoot is over. Yeah, that can be negative, right? The competition, while it may bring out a tremendous amount of good in people, also brings along a tremendous amount of bad. Because the bad actors in competition are always there. People like to poke fun at field shooters, right? And that's what I am, folks. I am no longer a competitor. I have no desire to compete, not against anyone else. The only person that I want to compete against is me. I want to compete against the conditions. I want to compete against technology. I want to see how far I can push this discipline, how small that I can make my performance downrange. There's enough challenge here without me wanting to beat up on someone else, especially when at the level that I shoot, there are so many people. There's an endless line of people that I could beat up on if we want to have a competition behind a rifle. So what's the point? It's just not challenging enough. It's not fulfilling enough. It doesn't mean anything to me if I beat you. The only thing that means anything to me is if I can beat myself. If I can make sure that I'm living my life today to ensure that I'll be better tomorrow. That's the only real element of competition that I'm interested in. With all the reverence given to competition and competitors, how about if we turn the tables for just a second? The real issue here that I want to talk about is not competitors and the positive or negative things that can come along with competition. I've touched on a few of these things, but it really just doesn't interest me anymore. As a mentor, if you come to me and you'd like to advance your skill set and you're going to use that skill set to go and do better in competition, and I do mentor a tremendous number of shooters where their primary thing that they're doing is engaging in competition. And I am very happy to help you do better behind a rifle. And I want you to do better in your competitions if that's what the goal that you come here for is, to get that knowledge. And I do counsel a whole bunch of shooters that are engaged in all manner of discipline, from bench rest to F-class, high power. I mean, there's so many similarities in what's going on here. At the end of the day, we're all using roughly the same cartridges with roughly the same configuration of rifles. There's some minor differences between them, but the goal is always the same. Take a bullet from your position and have it hit something down there with some degree of certainty and repeatability. And so the disciplines and the different techniques and tactics to be used in those disciplines will vary widely. But again, I don't really want to focus on the competition aspect and competition shooters. What I want to focus on is the people that are calling and feeling inferior. That is really something that you shouldn't be doing, because your use case that you have with your rifle and the reason that you'd want to pursue this discipline to get better at it does not have to have a competition element associated with it. You do not have to compete for this to be important. I take this discipline more seriously than anyone that I know or have talked with in my life. I spend every day, all day, pursuing it in one manner or the next. I shoot an absolute ton, and I do not compete and have no desire to compete. So you shouldn't feel like it's not important or that you shouldn't be handled with importance just because you're not competing. There's a lot of very good reasons to want to shoot very, very small and to shoot distant targets with regularity that have nothing to do with competition. Now, I like to hunt, I like to target shoot, and I do so very seriously. The difference is I do it very seriously for myself. I get a very pure satisfaction from pursuing this discipline. There's no argument that I need to make. There's no reasoning that I need to give. You either understand or you don't. There's nothing that I have to prove. A lot of times in my position, I will be expected to prove my talents and my skill set because obviously, why would anyone listen to me if I can't demonstrate competence? There is some truth to that. In my position as a mentor, I should be able to demonstrate what I can do. All throughout my YouTube channel are demonstrations of my competence, my ability to hit distant, small targets. Those demonstrations are there. I try not to make a big thing of it, though, because that's not the most important aspect of this discipline to me. Obviously, hitting what I'm aiming at, engaging the target that I want, hitting exactly where I want to hit it, I like that. I do enjoy that. But I've defined what is important to me in this discipline. And some of the things that are important to me seem very strange to some people. And the industry as a whole can often belittle those things. For instance, I'm a colony varmint shooter. The largest percentage of the rounds that I fire every year are fired at little fuzzy critters, prairie dogs. Yeah. And all manner of other varmints and undesirables as well. You know, we've got a lot of them in this area. And that's just something that's not taken very seriously in the industry anymore. Once upon a time, it was a huge focus of the industry. And it was done a lot. But it's something that seems to have fallen to the wayside because the popularity of competitive shooting has largely eclipsed it. And perhaps that is what's making people feel like they are lesser, is just the popularity of a thing. Well, here we touch on some of the darker elements of this whole conversation. Folks, why would you do something? Why would you be engaged in doing something feeling like you're a second-class citizen or that your contribution to the discipline is lesser just because you're not in the cool kids group? It seems strange, doesn't it? When you think about this, the mental ramifications for not feeling appreciated or not feeling like you're a part of the group, I don't want to downplay the importance of this social aspect because as social creatures, it's nice to be able to have fun conversations with other people and work out unique problems with other people. And the collection of a few minds together, the power of that is not to be understated. But also, there's a certain element of this discipline that will be forever off limits to the social shooter. The spiritual purity aspect of this discipline. It doesn't leave any room for your desire to beat others. This aspect of shooting is something that I wish people would focus more on because the calmness that comes along with the pursuit of an entirely selfish shooting career has rewards of its own. And I think those rewards are where the greatest advancements in this discipline come from, because they're made with complete purity that's separate from any worldly desire to get one over on someone else. There's a certain combative nature that comes along with trying to beat other people that you just can't get past it. If you've got that type of thinking and that type of mentality in your head, it's going to be clouding your decision-making process. The truths that might be revealed to you if you were looking at things with a little more purity, that truth might be withheld from you if you're latching onto the desire to beat someone else too tightly. Instead, if you're willing to just go on a journey all by yourself, no help, no safety net, no noise in the background, well, you can make some discoveries while you're on that path. Your knowledge of self that you can discover when you're on a journey like that is invaluable. The calmness and presence of mind that you can get when you're out there observing the condition, those precious moments before you execute a shot. If you're willing to go on that journey, shooting for yourself and the purity of the discipline above all, well, should you decide that you want to compete, those elements will make you a bomb-proof competitor. So there's, on one hand, there's no downside for pursuing the purity of the discipline by itself and then going out and competing. And you can even do the two in concert. You can be doing this while you're competing. But the presence of mind, you need to have it in order to understand what you're actually doing when you're out there competing. If your primary and utmost desire is to beat other people, you can't have any purity associated with that. The competitive nature that people have is just not conducive to foregoing yourself. There's been several times where I have been put into a competitive scenario where I'd be shooting with other people and all of a sudden somebody dreams up a game in their head and let's see who can do this first. Folks, I will intentionally dump shots. The last thing in the world I want to do right now is beat someone else. I don't care about it, and you shouldn't either. What I would like to see is people uplifted. What I would like to see is people made to feel confident. And I'm not talking about a false confidence that comes from the everyone gets a trophy and there are no losers generation that we seem to be in the middle of right now. But I'm talking about the calm confidence that comes from the pure pursuit of this discipline to its farthest reaches, to where you understand yourself, you understand what kind of shooter you are, you set out with every expectation to have every demand that you place upon this discipline fulfilled. At the end of the day, it's just you there behind that rifle. No one else is there. Every single time that you press that trigger, it's all on you. It doesn't matter how many great shooters you know or how many great shooters you talk to. What goes on during that tiny little sliver of time between when you press that trigger and that firing event starts until the time it's over, that tiny little sliver of time is 100% yours. You can do with it whatever you want. It can mean to you anything that you want. Now here's an example. I will compete with myself many times when I go out, especially shooting colony varmints. I'll take X number of rounds and I'll say to myself, well, I should be able to kill at least as many of these little critters as I have ammunition here. And I set lofty goals. And despite how lofty I might set them, oftentimes I'll do better than the goal that I set out. I remember on one occasion, one of the most meaningful experiences that I've had with a rifle to date happened when I set out with 100 rounds of ammunition and I wanted to make sure that I hit at least one prairie dog with every round fired. And I felt that to be a lofty goal. Well, that day I actually hit 114. I killed 114 prairie dogs with 100 rounds of ammunition. And to other people, that might seem silly. To other people, they don't care about that. They think that that's prideful or stupid. Whatever they may think is irrelevant to me. What's relevant to me is that here, these several years later, I still remember that absolutely. I still set some similar goals to that. If I go out with 100 rounds of ammunition and I believe in myself and my rifle, my capabilities, and the ability of putting that ammo together at the load bench, well, then there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to repeat that. There's a ton of content that's aimed at competitors. Well, let me aim this one directly at those of you that are not engaged in competition. You don't have to feel inferior. You don't have to feel like your goal of putting a bullet where you want it to go and having that happen in a predictable fashion is somehow only the thing that competitors should want. Your desires, whatever they may be, whether it's hunting, whether it's target shooting in your backyard, those goals are just as lofty as any. There doesn't need to be a governing body that you're answering to. There doesn't need to be a sanctioned event that you're attending. And there certainly doesn't need to be a score sheet that gives you the measure of your worth. You don't need any of that stuff. All you need is the truth of what you feel when you're connected to a precision rifle. All you need is your own definitions of your worth, your own definitions of what joy this discipline provides you. No competition, no competitors in those competitions can ever take that away from you. You don't have to ask anyone permission to be fulfilled and happy with shooting what you want to shoot, the way that you want to shoot it, as many times as you want to shoot it. In my opinion, the popularity of competition has caused this entire discipline to lose sight of the purity that can exist between the shooter and this discipline. It's time we start bringing some of that back. It's time we start bringing some of the perspective. Those of us that were here engaged in this discipline since long before it was cool know what that felt like. That childlike fascination with being able to press a trigger here on our end and down there at the other end, hear that distant ring of steel, or see that slight disruption of the fur directly in line with the vital zone on a distant deer or pronghorn or big game animal, or maybe seeing the particular varmint of your choosing get detonated and launched into the air. Folks, whatever this discipline means to you, let it have some purity. Let it stand for something in your life. Don't be afraid to care about it as much as you want to care about it. Don't let anyone downplay how important it is to you. If you'd like to build your entire life around precision rifle shooting, as I have, then don't let anyone stop you.